The University Hospital in Düsseldorf has entered a state of high-alert bio-isolation following the arrival of a patient suspected of carrying a highly unusual and potentially mutated strain of hantavirus. This development comes amid a complex international public health investigation that began in the South Atlantic and has now reached the heart of North Rhine-Westphalia. Health officials in Germany are coordinating closely with the Robert Koch Institute and the World Health Organization to manage what is being described as a significant clinical challenge involving a pathogen known for its high fatality rate and, in rare instances, its capacity for human-to-human transmission. The situation is anchored in a recent outbreak identified aboard the cruise vessel Hondius, which had been traveling from southern Argentina before reporting a cluster of severe respiratory illnesses. While hantaviruses are typically categorized into two distinct clinical syndromes, Hantavirus Pulmonary Syndrome, or HPS, common in the Americas, and hemorrhagic fever with Raynaud syndrome, or HFRS, more frequent in Europe and Asia. The current case in Düsseldorf has drawn intense scrutiny due to reports of genomic variations that may deviate from known viral archetypes. Public health surveillance systems were triggered after several fatalities occurred during the ship's transit, including at least one German national. For the general public, the significance of this event lies not in the scale of the current infection numbers, which remain low, but in the specific biological characteristics of the virus being isolated. Traditionally, hantaviruses are zoonotic, meaning they jump from animals to humans, usually through the inhalation of aerosolized particles from the waste of infected rodents. However, the specific strain involved in this incident, identified as an Andes virus variant, carries a documented history of limited person-to-person spread, a factor that necessitates the rigorous biocontainment measures now visible in Düsseldorf. Medical teams are operating under the strictest safety protocols, utilizing specialized ventilation and full-body protective equipment to prevent any potential environmental leak or secondary infection within the facility. This framing of the event as a mutated threat stems from preliminary molecular sequencing, which suggests subtle but important shifts in the viral genome, prompting scientists to investigate whether these changes influence the virus's virulence or its ability to remain stable in human hosts. As the patient undergoes intensive care, the priority remains the stabilization of the individual and the definitive mapping of the virus's genetic signature to ensure that current diagnostic tools and clinical management strategies remain effective against this evolving biological threat. The core developments surrounding the Düsseldorf Isolation Unit involve a multi-agency response led by the Robert Koch Institute and supported by the European Center for Disease Prevention and Control. According to official statements, the repatriation of German nationals from the cruise ship Hondius was conducted through a highly controlled corridor, involving medical evacuations to specialized centers equipped with Level 3 or higher biosafety capabilities. In Düsseldorf, the focus is now squarely on the laboratory and clinical data emerging from the isolated patient. Laboratory teams are utilizing polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, and serological testing to confirm the presence of the Andes virus, while simultaneously conducting whole genome sequencing to verify the claims of mutation. The World Health Organization has been quick to manage public expectations, with Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus stating that while this is a serious public health event, it is not a new COVID, emphasizing that the transmission dynamics of hantaviruses remain fundamentally different from highly contagious respiratory viruses like SARS-CoV-2. Despite this, the clinical progression observed in confirmed cases has been rapid and severe. Patients typically present with a prodromal phase of fever, myalgia, and gastrointestinal distress, which can transition within days to acute respiratory distress syndrome and cardiogenic shock. In the cruise ship cluster, at least 8 cases were identified, resulting in 3 deaths, including an elderly couple from the Netherlands and a woman from Germany. This 38% case fatality ratio highlights why the arrival of even a single case in a major urban center like Düsseldorf triggers such an intensive response. The logistical complexity of the operation was further demonstrated during the disembarkation process in Tenerife, where passengers were moved in sealed, escorted vehicles to prevent any contact with the local population. German health authorities have noted that the responsibility for monitoring repatriated individuals falls to local health offices, or Gesundheitsämter, based on the principle of residence. These agencies are now tasked with enforcing a 6-week quarantine period for those with potential exposure, a duration dictated by the virus's long incubation period. In the labs, the search for a mutated strain is focused on the viral RNA segments. Scientists are looking for changes in the S, M, or L segments of the virus that could indicate an adaptation to human cellular receptors. If confirmed, such mutations would explain why the virus appeared to spread more efficiently within the confined environment of the ship. However, officials caution that mutation is a standard biological process and does not always result in increased danger. It can often be a neutral shift or even a reduction in fitness. The current scientific objective is to determine exactly which of these paths the Düsseldorf strain has taken. Prevention and surveillance remain the primary tools for managing hantavirus risks, even as the situation in Düsseldorf continues to unfold. Public health guidance remains consistent. The most effective way to prevent hantavirus infection is the rigorous control of rodent populations and the avoidance of contact with their excreta. In rural or infested areas, this involves rodent-proofing buildings, securing food supplies, and using wet mopping techniques with disinfectants like bleach rather than sweeping or vacuuming, which can kick up viral particles into the air. For the specific Andes virus variant currently under investigation, secondary prevention in clinical settings is paramount. Healthcare providers are instructed to maintain high levels of suspicion for any patient presenting with rapid onset respiratory failure who has a history of travel to endemic areas or contact with known cases. Surveillance efforts in Germany have been expanded to include enhanced monitoring of all passengers from the Hondius, with the Robert Koch Institute recommending a mandatory 6-week observation window to cover the maximum known incubation period. This conservative approach is intended to catch any potential secondary cases before they can become new points of transmission. There are, however, significant limits to current knowledge. There is no widely approved vaccine for the Andes virus, nor is there a specific antiviral therapy that has proven universally effective, meaning that clinical management is almost entirely supportive, often requiring mechanical ventilation and extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or ECMO. The uncertainty regarding the mutated nature of the strain persists, as genetic sequencing is a meticulous process that requires time to yield definitive results. Officials have been clear that until the genomic data is fully analyzed, they cannot rule out or confirm if this strain poses a greater risk than previous outbreaks in South America. The closing of the cruise ship investigation and the focus on bio-isolation in Düsseldorf represent a transition from an active outbreak to a phase of containment and scientific analysis. The public is urged to remain calm, as the risk to the general population in Europe is currently assessed as very low by both the ECDC and the WHO. The measures taken in Germany are a testament to the robustness of the modern public health infrastructure, designed to intercept and neutralize rare viral threats before they can establish a foothold. As labs continue their work, the primary focus remains the health of the isolated patients and the continued monitoring of those in quarantine. For more updates on international health security and breaking medical news, consider subscribing to this channel. The core developments of this public health crisis are currently centered on the University Hospital Düsseldorf's specialized infection ward, where clinical teams and the Robert Koch Institute are managing the arrival of individuals linked to the MV Hondius outbreak. A key focus of the laboratory effort involves the definitive identification of the viral strain through polymerase chain reaction, or PCR, and metagenomic sequencing. While preliminary reports from the ship and early evacuation sites in South Africa confirmed the presence of the Andes virus, or ANDV, the German investigation is specifically looking for genomic variations that could explain the rapid cluster of infections within the vessel's confined quarters. Unlike most hantaviruses, which are strictly zoonotic and require direct or aerosolized contact with rodent excreta, the Andes strain is the only known hantavirus documented to spread through human-to-human contact. Researchers are currently analyzing the viral RNA, specifically the S, M, and L segments, to determine if the mutated designation reported by local sources reflects a significant change in the virus's surface glycoproteins, which could potentially increase its stability in aerosol form or its affinity for human lung cell receptors. The logistics of the German response have been characterized by extreme caution. The primary patient of interest in Düsseldorf was intercepted at Amsterdam's Schiphol Airport after traveling from the South Atlantic. This individual was transported to North Rhine-Westphalia via a dedicated medical convoy orchestrated by the Düsseldorf Fire Department, ensuring zero contact with the public during the transition to the hospital's bio-isolation unit. Although the Robert Koch Institute noted that an initial PCR and serological screen for this specific contact person returned negative results, the facility is maintaining strict isolation protocols due to the virus's protracted incubation period, which can last anywhere from 1 to 8 weeks. This caution is justified by the clinical data emerging from other confirmed cases in the cluster. Of the 8 confirmed or probable cases identified since the outbreak began in early April, the case-fatality ratio has held steady at approximately 38%. The fatalities include a German woman and an elderly couple from the Netherlands, the latter of whom are believed to have been the index cases after a birdwatching excursion in high-risk rodent habitats in southern Argentina and Chile. On the international stage, the surveillance network has expanded to track nearly 150 passengers and crew as the MV Hondius arrives at the Granadilla port in Tenerife. Spanish Health Minister Mónica Garcia has described the coordination as an unprecedented operation involving 23 countries and the World Health Organization. While the ship is being treated as a mobile hot zone, international health officials are racing to provide clarity on the clinical status of the remaining passengers. In Zurich and the Netherlands, other patients remain in intensive care, suffering from the classic progression of Hantavirus Pulmonary Syndrome, a flu-like prodromal phase followed by a sudden catastrophic drop in blood pressure and the accumulation of fluid in the lungs. This transition, often referred to as the leakage phase, is what makes the Andes strain particularly lethal, as it causes systemic vascular permeability. The World Health Organization, led by Director General Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, has moved to temper public anxiety, stating clearly that the current events do not represent a nascent global pandemic on the scale of recent respiratory crises. The WO's assessment remains that while the risk to those on board the ship is moderate, the risk to the general global population is low, given that human-to-human transmission of the Andes virus is typically limited to very close, prolonged contact. However, the intensity of the bio-isolation in Düsseldorf and the rigorous monitoring of travelers in Zurich and Johannesburg reflect a zero-fail approach to containment. The scientific community remains in a state of high vigilance as they wait for the final results of the whole genome sequencing from the Düsseldorf labs, which will confirm whether the viral behavior observed on the Hondius was the result of a specific genetic mutation or simply the byproduct of an older, highly susceptible population in a shared environment. As the clinical and laboratory investigations in Düsseldorf proceed, public health agencies are shifting their focus toward long-term surveillance and the reinforcement of established prevention protocols to mitigate the risk of further transmission. The practical takeaways for the public, particularly those traveling to or residing in regions where hantaviruses are endemic, remain anchored in rodent control and environmental hygiene. Health officials reiterate that the primary reservoir for the Andes virus is the long-tailed pygmy rice rat, and while the current case in Germany involves a potentially mutated strain, the fundamental transmission route, through the inhalation of aerosolized viral particles from rodent urine, droppings, or saliva, remains the most common threat. In domestic or industrial settings where rodent activity is suspected, authorities advise against sweeping or vacuuming, which can launch viral particles into the air. Instead, the use of a 10% bleach solution or a 70% alcohol disinfectant to wet down surfaces before cleaning is the recommended standard. For travelers returning from southern Argentina, Chile, or other high-risk areas in the Americas, the guidance is specific: Monitor for a high fever, severe muscle aches, and sudden gastrointestinal distress for up to 6 weeks. This 42-day observation window, as enforced by the Robert Koch Institute and local German health offices, is critical because of the unusually long incubation period of hantaviruses, during which an individual may remain asymptomatic while potentially harboring the pathogen. The surveillance effort is not limited to the individual in Düsseldorf, but extends to a global tracking network. Under the international health regulations, the World Health Organization is coordinating with 23 nations to monitor the health of every passenger and crew member who disembarked from the MV Hondius. This involves a rigorous reporting system where local Gesundheitsämter or municipal health departments are tasked with daily check-ins. The ethical dimension of these measures is significant. Health officials must balance the necessity of restrictive bioisolation and mandatory quarantines against the individual liberties of those who may have been exposed but are not yet ill. In Düsseldorf, the use of high-security bioisolation units is framed not as a punitive measure, but as an essential protective barrier for both the patient and the metropolitan population. This high-consequence infectious disease protocol is designed to eliminate the possibility of secondary transmission, especially given the Andes virus's documented ability to spread through close person-to-person contact, a biological trait that distinguishes it from the more common, non-contagious Pumala or Dobrava hantaviruses found in Central Europe. Looking forward, the limits of current medical knowledge remain a primary concern for the scientific community. There is currently no globally approved vaccine for the Andes virus, nor is there a specific antiviral drug that has shown definitive efficacy in large-scale clinical trials. Treatments such as ribavirin have yielded inconsistent results, and newer candidates like favipiravir are still under evaluation in specialized settings. This leaves medical teams with supportive care as their primary tool, which, in the case of Hantavirus Pulmonary Syndrome, requires highly resource-intensive interventions such as mechanical ventilation or extracorporeal membrane oxygenation, or ECMO, to bypass the failing lungs. The uncertainty regarding the mutated nature of the Düsseldorf strain adds another layer of complexity. Until the whole genome sequencing is completed and compared against historical viral libraries, officials cannot say with certainty whether the genetic shifts observed represent a more stable aerosol profile or an increased ability to evade the human immune system. The ethical closing of this report emphasizes the responsibility of public health institutions to provide transparent, evidence-based communication to avoid the tabloid-style sensationalism that often accompanies rare viral outbreaks. While the term mutated can trigger public alarm, it is a routine biological occurrence that the scientific community is well equipped to handle through molecular surveillance. The arrival of this virus in a major European transport hub like Düsseldorf serves as a reminder of the speed at which local biological events can become international concerns in a globalized society. However, the rapid activation of the university hospital's bioisolation protocols and the seamless coordination between German authorities, the ECDC, and the WHO demonstrate a robust infrastructure designed specifically for this type of intercept. For now, the public is urged to trust in these established systems and to remain vigilant regarding travel-related health guidance without succumbing to unnecessary panic. As the lab results from the Robert Koch Institute are finalized, we will continue to provide factual updates on the status of the containment effort and the condition of the patients involved. To stay informed on this and other developing public health stories, please consider subscribing to our channel.